Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning shortly. If you'll take your seats in the auditorium, we'll be beginning shortly. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening and welcome to the Center for Strategic International Studies. I'm Andrew Schwartz. I'm our Chief Communications Officer here at CSIS, also known as Michael Goldberg's first cousin. Second cousin, actually, second cousin. And I'm honored to have my cousin here. This is a great experience and a great treat for me. If any of you have been reading about Michael and seeing his posts on Facebook, you know he lives an incredibly interesting life. And I was thinking today, you know, it's beyond Silicon Valley. I've had an interesting day today. Today I've been meeting with filmmakers from Los Angeles. I've been meeting with policy people. I just literally was upstairs meeting with some people from Silicon Valley who are helping us with data and satellite imaging that shows what's going on in the South China Sea. And many people know that we're pretty well known for our policy work in the South China Sea here at CSIS. And I was thinking about Michael's work beyond Silicon Valley. If every place could think beyond Silicon Valley, what a great thing that could be. If Washington could think beyond Washington, what a great thing that could be. But without further ado, I want to say my cousin Michael is an interesting guy who I've learned a lot from over the years, and I continue to learn a lot from. His travels are legendary. The writing in this book, if you're just getting it for the first time, I've been furiously reading through it. It's a fantastic and fascinating book, and it's not, what I love about it is, yes, Michael's a professor at Case Western Reserve, but it's not written as an academic tome. It's a practical thing that everybody can use. After all, it's massive, right? It's massive online MOOC. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce my cousin, Michael Goldberg. Thanks for being here, Michael.
Okay, the button is here. Andrew, it's great to see you. It wouldn't have been the same at Passover next year if if I had gone to another one of the great institutions here in DC and not CSIS. So, but thank you for having me. It's great to see a number of old friends here and meet new folks as well. And we'll talk about it in a second, but I have two of the students of my course who I met for the first time. Yvette this morning we'll talk about, and Lori Picard, I met yesterday. We also have the ambassador from Belize is here. Thank you very much for joining. It's great to meet you as well. All right, here we go. So a little bit about my background. Again, some of you know me and know me from some of these places. So I did my undergraduate with a few folks in the room at Princeton. I worked at the National Democratic Institute with a few folks in this room, although Josh Freeman was in cold Russia and I was in warm Cape Town, and worked on Mandela's election in 1994. I did a joint MBA and Master's in International Affairs at Wharton and SICE. I don't think any of my Wharton and SICE buddies are here. Then did an internship at Microsoft, worked at America Online down the Dulles Toll Road before we merged with Time Warner. It's interesting being an AOL veteran, particularly like in Cleveland, when I teach my entrepreneurship courses and I talk about AOL, many of my students have never heard of AOL or ever used dial-up internet. So I worked there on international joint ventures, mostly in the China market. I moved back to my hometown of Cleveland in 2005 to set up a venture capital fund with a partner based in Israel to support the investing in basically pre-US commercialization Israeli medical device companies. And then started teaching at Case Western Reserve University, where I am now. And also, I know a few friends from the State Department here, was lucky enough to do a Fulbright fellowship in 2012. There's my crew. Anyone know that country flag? Anyone? Uncle Pat? Vietnam. This is a participation kind of thing. I know half the people in the room. So we were in Vietnam. It was a really interesting sort of Fulbright that was actually in Laos. Not sure that the monk community in Laos was super interested in what I was talking about in terms of entrepreneurship, but I was doing more traditional courses, and I got asked by the Ministry of Science and Technology in Vietnam to do a course about how Vietnam could become more like Silicon Valley. And before I sort of get to kind of what I ended up talking about, I'm sort of curious, and again, this will be somewhat participatory. What is it about Silicon Valley that everybody is interested? Because you hear this all the time. Even Andrew's comment that upstairs folks from Silicon Valley are here tracking data in the South China Sea. What is it that everybody wants, whether you're Hanoi, Cleveland, Baltimore? What is it they see? Yeah.
Everyone wants resources.
Okay. Talk about that. So capital.
Well, when you're starting a business, then you obviously believe that money is the solution to everything. It's not necessarily that. It's desire.
Yeah. Right. So some of it is it's access to capital, and it is challenging in markets outside Silicon Valley. And in San Francisco, for those who have spent time out there, it does feel like every coffee shop is filled with people hearing pitches, and it's a place that congregate. What else? What else about San Francisco or Silicon Valley? Yeah. Cutting edge technology. Exactly. What else? Yeah.
Exceptional talent.
Right. Talent. And a lot of the people in places like Cleveland leave to go to Silicon Valley because that's where universities are, that's where companies are. So all of these things are true, obviously. In San Francisco, you've got these sort of iconic companies and their leaders, and then the capital piece. So some of these companies, the venture capital funds like Sequoia or Greylock or Andreessen may be less well known. But at this point, even though San Francisco and Silicon Valley was built on governmental involvement, at this point, it's a fully formed private sector ecosystem that supports the growth of entrepreneurship. Instead of teaching them about Silicon Valley, and I've been to San Francisco a number of times, I actually thought it'd be more relevant to teach them about that city. Mike Lowe, your hometown. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Jeff, welcome. So Cleveland. So why Cleveland? We got together last night to watch that gentleman. Any Wizards fans in here? Sorry. Yes, we have him, and you don't, and Toronto does not. So, many people only know Cleveland for LeBron. I mean, it's true when you sort of travel the world, you sort of say you're from Cleveland and you're known for LeBron. In fact, 100 years ago, we were one of the most important manufacturing cities in the U.S. This is our most famous entrepreneur. Anyone? Did you say LeBron? No, yeah, it's not an early photo of LeBron. John Rockefeller. And then, so we were, obviously for those who have not been to Cleveland, located in between Pittsburgh and Detroit, a key, sort of cog in the manufacturing ecosystem. And then, the 60s, 70s, 80s happened. A lot of our manufacturing jobs moved away, and our community was in transition. And for young people like, when Mike Lowe and I, who went to high school together, when we graduated from high school in 88, 87, like most of us were like, we're not going to come back. Our population in Cleveland was 5th in the US, and we dropped to 47th largest. And, in terms of folks that were interested in doing startups, in 2001, Entrepreneur Magazine ranked Cleveland relative to other cities in the US in terms of how well we supported entrepreneurship. We did not fare well. And, things were bad. So beginning in 2003, 2004, actually McKinsey did a pro bono study looking at other communities and how they supported entrepreneurship. And we really embarked on this deep attempt to sort of kickstart entrepreneurship in the community. Unlike Silicon Valley, that, as I mentioned, has a fully formed privately driven entrepreneurial ecosystem. In Cleveland, the other places that the money came from were government, and in our case, and I'll talk about it in a second, it came through something called the Third Frontier, which is a $2.3 billion state of Ohio program, and then philanthropy. So a lot of our traditional philanthropy that had supported things like the Cleveland Orchestra or the Cleveland Museum of Art, more social services started to support technology-based entrepreneurship to basically kickstart our economy. So those were really two pillars. The Fund for Our Economic Future is interested in particular in that it brought together a lot of foundations that had never traditionally supported entrepreneurship to really look at, one of the leaders of the Cleveland Foundation basically said, if you don't support startups and we don't have people, there's not going to be any money left to go to the Cleveland Orchestra. We created non-governmental organizations to sort of help fill the gap. We actually mimicked an initiative in Pittsburgh called Innovation Works. Interestingly, and I know there's folks, because we're in DC, people have worked at NGOs. NGOs often sort of fill that gap between what government is limited to do and the private sector may not be doing, and NGOs sort of emerge and sort of nowhere better than in Washington. So Jumpstart was formed as an NGO. Interestingly, they had an investment fund. They recruited and hired experienced venture capitalists and investors to work for this NGO. And the model is basically they invest in companies, and upon exit in the company, the money then goes back into the kitty. Jumpstart's invested in over 100 companies since it was founded in 2005. And they've invested over $40 million. One of the interesting pieces of this, and we can talk about it in the Q&A, is if investors don't make money and entrepreneurs don't make money, a lot of these initiatives don't work. And the big news in Cleveland was that last summer, one of the 100 companies in the Jumpstart portfolio, Cover My Meds, sold to McKesson for $1.1 billion. This was critical, and actually the amount of money that Jumpstart made on that deal basically covered the whole fund. So they made about $40 million on that deal. If Jumpstart, if you don't have a pipeline in a place like Cleveland or some of the other places that folks in here may represent, it's a real challenge. So this was huge for us. Spinning out technology out of anchor institutions. This example that we talk about on our campus, this is Charu Ramanathan, who took a technology called Cardio Insight out of the lab and was acquired by Medtronic. Interestingly, it's very challenging for universities to commercialize technology. Oftentimes they're looking to license out technologies. It's hard to spin these independent companies. We set up something on our campus where half the money for Case Technology Ventures came from the government and half of it came from the universities. This is another example of how communities look to support entrepreneurship by leveraging, whether it's leading hospitals or universities. We didn't have any accelerators in Cleveland. Accelerators are a bit of the flavor of the month. There's the Techstars in DC. What are the accelerator? I mean, I know there's 1776. What are the other accelerators here? Does Techstars have a? Not 100% sure. Anyway, in Cleveland, we didn't have any. In Cleveland, to subsidize the creation of accelerators, there's money that came from state government. So Flash Starts has backed a number of my students, including some of those, to build that early stage acceleration. Again, if you compare this to San Francisco to Y Combinator, which is the most famous accelerator, the state of California doesn't need to subsidize Y Combinator, the private market. People are sort of standing outside at demo day at Y Combinator. There's plenty of people willing to invest in startups coming out of Y Combinator. So angel funding is an interesting topic. So in Ohio, we, through some tax incentives from the state and also through the Third Frontier program, they're subsidizing the funding of the formation of angel funds. And the idea of an angel fund would be that it's a committed group. So if we form the CSIS angel fund, everybody would commit a certain amount of money. We'd hire Neil to run the fund. People pitch, and it looks more like a venture capital fund in that there's management fees that go along with that. Other countries around the world, including Turkey and some other places, have subsidized, have pushed for angel investing by doing funds. Again, in San Francisco or even in DC, you don't have government subsidizing the formation of angel funds. So this is something that we did in Ohio because we just had a lack of angel capital. The last thing I'll talk about in Ohio is on the venture capital side. My biggest investor in our venture capital fund is the Ohio Capital Fund. This is a government fund of funds. And again, the idea is that to create more venture capital funds in a community, you need government to play a role. So this is basically the seminar that I did via Skype in Vietnam. This is the picture we took afterwards. I really didn't think that we were going to be doing anything with it. I don't really teach. I hadn't taught much on kind of entrepreneurial ecosystem development in the past. I then met with one of my deans, and he asked me if I'd consider turning this seminar that I had taught into a MOOC. I honestly didn't know what a MOOC was. I Googled it on my phone when I left his office. As Andrew alluded to, it stands for Massive Open Online Course. And I ended up getting a grant from a foundation, and what we ended up doing was interviewing a number of folks in our community in Cleveland and sort of coming up with like a Cleveland case study of what we have done. And then actually a former 60 Minutes producer who had moved back to Cleveland recently helped me kind of with the storytelling. It's 9 12-minute videos, and then the course has other sort of materials, but it was really kind of intended for people around the world to look at how to sort of use what we learned in Cleveland to support their efforts to support entrepreneurship in their community. So we launched the class in 2014. We've had 135,000 people take the class from 190 countries, and the book that some of you were able to pick up, sorry, I didn't order a ton of books. I wasn't sure, I was hoping we'd have a huge crowd like today, but I didn't order that many books. But you can get it for free actually on this Beyond Silicon Valley book website, or you can order it. We were charging the minimum price on Amazon. I think it's like $6, and all the proceeds go to support buying more books for other students. So we just released this book last week, and it tells the stories of 20 of the students in the class. I'll just tell you a couple of the stories, and 2 of them are here. So one of the stories that we tell in the book is in Greece. Because of the financial crisis in Greece, there was actually the U.S. Embassy there was extremely interested in partnering with us around the course. They promoted the MOOC, and what they ended up doing was actually making some of their own videos that told the story of supporting entrepreneurship in the Greek context. They were watching some of our videos. We were engaging via WebEx in discussions and sort of true Greek style. Then they were arguing with each other about what things made sense. I then went over, we had our final meetup of the course when it was session-based in Greece, and actually that's a business school professor in Greece, and on the right is somebody who works at Jumpstart, a Greek American who works at Jumpstart. The second story I'll talk about is Iran. Mehdi Sajapur is an Iranian entrepreneur who took the course, and it was funny, and it's probably hard to read, but he found a lot of value. I mean, I have never traveled to Tehran, but he found a lot of value in and identification with the Cleveland story in terms of what they were doing to support entrepreneurship in Tehran, which is interesting. So Yvette, who's here today from Belize, actually we were just telling the story today over breakfast. So Yvette is an amazing entrepreneur in Belize. She saw an advertisement in the newspaper, I just learned this today, in her home city of, how do you pronounce it, Belmopan? About that the U.S. Embassy was hosting meetups around the course. And I just happened to notice like quite a few students, including Yvette, in the course talking about Belize. Belize has 280,000 people. So I was like, this is a lot of people. I didn't know. I was like, you know, what is going on in Belize that they're all taking my class? And I ended up reaching out and got in touch, and we did a Skype session. It's really been a magical journey for Yvette since taking the class. And it's interesting because I think a lot of things like MOOCs are about building networks. She then was selected based out of some of the relationships she built to attend as the representative from Belize for the Global Entrepreneurship Congress, right? Summit, sorry, GES, in Kenya, where President Obama attended in 2015, and then she was selected for the International Visitor Leadership Program, which is another State Department program, to come here and with female entrepreneurs and visited a number of cities. And so it was really inspiring. So her story is one of the ones that we profile in the book. And it was awesome to meet her and her husband, Roberto, today in person. They feel like old friends, even though we just met this morning. The last person who I met yesterday, is Lori Picard. Lori was working in the entrepreneurship space for USAID in Kigali, Rwanda. We met, again, just kind of, I mean, one of the things in teaching the classes, I was sort of like digging in and sort of seeing active users. So we met kind of in the course. I was really intrigued. It turned out she was interested in business education and was like basically curating a number of free business courses into what she was calling her no pay MBA, which was a blog. She then hosted for the second session of the course in Kigali a group of folks around the course. And part of the power of really kind of deepening the experience is getting people together around the class. So she did that in Kigali. Then she brought a group of her kind of no pay MBA folks from around the world to take the class in a further session. She now has a book out. Everybody's got a book. Future CSIS speaker called Don't Pay for Your MBA. So it was funny. One of my colleagues was like, I just picked up this book at the airport and you're in it. I'm like, what book is that? So it's Lori's book. So it's great to meet her, and she's doing some great things around MOOCs, and now is working for Class Central now that she's back in DC. The last story I'll tell, and then I want to open it up to questions. So this is just last week. We were giving the book away for free on the website, and I looked at the list of people, and one of the first people to download the book is Amjad Istafif, I'm probably pronouncing it incorrectly, from Damascus. And so I reached out to him and I was curious how he knew about the book. So he's actually doing an interesting project. I mean, he emailed me back. I ended up talking to him. He's running a hackerspace in Syria funded by UNDP. And one of the things that he said in his email to me was that he said it helped me feel more comfortable. We're not the only crazy people looking beyond unicorn startup ecosystems. I ended up having a Skype call with him subsequently, and he was talking about, obviously, it's an extremely challenging time for young people in Syria. They're looking to engage. Things like MOOCs are a way for them to reach out to broader networks. And actually, we're going to plan this fall I teach my class as like a flipped course to students there. We're going to have a cohort of folks in Syria take the class alongside my Case Western Reserve University students. So anyway, I mean, these MOOCs and reaching out to communities around the world has been amazing. I've done, I think, 28 different, mostly through U.S. Embassy programs, over the past 6 years programs in these countries, and you know, there are differences in many of these countries. It doesn't always look like places like Belize, Hanoi, Kigali look different, but there's a lot of similarities in some of the struggles that folks are having around the world in supporting entrepreneurship. And again, I think things like MOOCs provide that interconnectivity between folks. So that's kind of my formal chat, but I'd love to answer any questions that you guys have, either for me or for Yvette and Lori as well. Yeah, and maybe introduce yourself, kind of where you're from.
Sure, yeah. Hi. Great, thanks for sharing. My name is Gabelacho, and I work at IREX. I'm a technical expert focusing on youth economic opportunity. So alongside that, there's the entrepreneurship piece. And so we actually implement one of the department's state programs, the YALI Fellowship, if you're familiar with. So supporting entrepreneurs and young leaders is one of the core mandates of our organization. I'm curious to hear, since you have such a broad spanning network, what you have seen as trends in terms of the needs that entrepreneurs have expressed to you as skills that they need or support that they need. What is emerging from the fray as the priorities to help these entrepreneurs get to the next level?
Sure.
Thank you.
No, thanks for your question. We were happy to be a host last summer at Case Western Reserve for a public management cohort from the YALI Fellows, which is great. So that program and the talent that they're tapping into. And it's interesting because Lindsay works on the YALI network. There's only a small number of folks that are able to come on the fellowship to the US, but there's a tremendous network of folks that are interested in interconnectivity with a broader group. Also, I was invited on one of the alumni YALI alumni social entrepreneurship programs because there's some funding available for YALI fellows once they return home. So I did some work in Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Namibia with a YALI fellow. So I love the YALI program. So I think we're seeing a couple things. I mean, the technology-based entrepreneurship, I mean, it's interesting in a place like Cleveland because even this discussion of like what things should get funded and how do you prioritize and, clusters and focus. How do you, because I think entrepreneurship looks different in different parts of the world. On a recent trip to Tanzania, actually, we were hosted by a YALI fellow, and I was blown away by some of the stuff that I'd seen in the mobile payment space with M-Pesa and other, where, things that sort of started out as more development efforts turn into real businesses and some of their applications and even in more rural communities. So I think having a technology base of entrepreneurship, which leads to high growth, because I think this is a struggle on the pipeline side. I mean, you have entrepreneurs that want to solve many needs out there, but I think the question of job creation is critical to governments, it's critical to donors, and it's been interesting. Even in the social entrepreneurship space, of which I participated in, and as I mentioned on this YALI alumni program, I think one of the questions oftentimes that I've seen in the developing world is like, is this truly a business or is it better addressed through an NGO? I mean, are you better off? Because I think social entrepreneurship is a hot area, and solving some of these challenges that people are looking at. Oftentimes people are sort of going after social entrepreneurship dollars, but developing, helping, and my course doesn't exactly do this. I mean, my course isn't really sort of for how you do business planning, and there's lots of tools that are out there. And I think one of the amazing things for any people that are entrepreneurs, I mean, things like the business model canvas or lean startup, like you go to accelerators around the world and people are using some of the same playbook, which is great. But I think these technology-based entrepreneurship where there's higher growth opportunities is where there is a lot of focus. But I think the applications can be quite broad. It doesn't necessarily need to be only in app development and where you build your pipeline. Yeah, Neil.
Neil Simoes with the National Center. Trying to just project. National Center for Family Philanthropy. You mentioned
philanthropy and the role that philanthropy can play in supporting entrepreneurship. Cleveland Foundation, sort of the 600-pound gorilla in the room of Cleveland philanthropy, they were able to mobilize philanthropic dollars behind supporting entrepreneurship. What's your sense in other communities and other parts of the world of the role that philanthropy has played or can play, or how you get philanthropists motivated to support entrepreneurship as opposed to making a grant to their local arts?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's interesting, actually, Peter Kellner, who's one of the founders of Endeavor and a college friend of some of us in the room, when I asked him on the MOOC about philanthropy, it was interesting. I thought it was sort of because at a very high level, we often talk on the governmental side, because of election cycles, it's hard for government to really make the long-term commitment to see these things through. It was interesting, actually, the Ohio governor that put the Third Frontier program in place, he said the success of this program is going to be after I'm out of office. And I think, and it doesn't even matter if it's the current political climate or any political climate, it's very difficult for political leaders to have a long-term view. I think in general with philanthropy, at least my impression had been, and I saw it in Cleveland, was like that philanthropists can take a longer term view than government. In the MOOC, when I interviewed Peter, it was interesting. It was like a great, he's a great interview. He basically like threw philanthropy under the bus on this question of taking a long-term view about entrepreneurship. And it actually kind of surprised me because I think, again, compared to government, but he's like, in philanthropy, donors lose interest, and so in Cleveland, we've seen a commitment that the Cleveland Foundation and others did early on. And, quite frankly, they started to look at other efforts as well. And, a lot of their more recent work was focused on not so much technology-based entrepreneurship, but sort of urban core entrepreneurship issues. And I think the other question, and there's a number of folks in this room that kind of wear these hats on sort of the donor side, because philanthropy looks different outside the U.S. So the donors could be USAID, donors could be, other multinational kind of organizations. And, even in some of the work I know that the U.S. government is doing overseas, like there's questions about, the last administration had a huge commitment towards around entrepreneurship, and, it's not clear for a lot of these programs, like, will there be long-term donor support? So, I think it's a fascinating question. Like, I think we struggle with it in Cleveland. Frankly, like, we're in Cleveland, we've made some progress. We're like 10 years in. I talk about this all the time. It's like a 50-year journey. And I think philanthropy is better suited to be on a 50-year journey than probably government is oftentimes, but they get, the next shiny toy in the corner. And obviously, like, I'm being a bit facetious because there's so many issues that come up, and it's hard, whether it's the arts, whether it's like social services. There's so many things that pull donors in different directions, and I know you're close to it. Yeah.
How did you do the marketing? How did people get signed up, get the knowledge about this course?
Sure. So the question about the marketing for the course. So we were on, Coursera is the largest platform of the MOOCs, although there's a growing number. Lori and I were talking today about there's a lot of new platforms that are out there. So Coursera has the biggest reach. And then we did a lot actually with partners, some are DC-based partners, folks that are involved in the entrepreneurship space and sharing. Social media is a big one, as I have all my social media things up there. Using Facebook, using Twitter, trying to get in people's newsletters, letting people know about it. The wonderful thing, particularly not just my MOOC, but many of the MOOCs are free courses. Now this book is free. So you want to get it in the hands of people that can use it. And oftentimes you just have to be creative about networks. The State Department has been a great partner. There's a lot of alignment with some of the things that they're trying to do in markets. Everybody has multiple objectives, right? So public affairs folks in U.S. embassies overseas, there's a number of things that they're trying to do, one of which is sort of sharing some of the leading things that are happening at U.S. universities. I've also worked with corporations, so like Microsoft has something called Microsoft Innovation Centers. I've partnered with them in some countries. Google has a Google for Entrepreneurs program. So I think a lot of times it's finding bedfellows that share, kind of have an aligned perspective. But I've tried to be creative. But mostly it's just by being, the bigger numbers is because you're on the biggest platform. Yeah.
I was wondering, since you're in a position of being so people bombard you with their ideas, and that sometimes you have to play the judge or devil's advocate for them. Do they come to you with requests for how can I meet these people that can help me with the resources?
I mean, I think what you're getting at is on the mentoring side. I mean, it's funny, actually. There was an entrepreneur who recently came on the Southeast Asia. Did you ever meet her, Dave? The woman from Indonesia. So it's just like, so I travel all the time. So a woman came up to me. I was at a presentation in Indonesia. She came up to me afterwards, exactly like, hey, I've got this idea. And it's funny because she looked so young when she came up to me. She was 19 years old, but I mean, my kids are like teenagers. I thought I was talking to like my 14-year-old daughter, and she starts telling me this idea that she has about, there's an Uber-like company in Indonesia called Gojek, which is a venture capital-backed huge success, which is ride sharing on the back of motorbikes. And, but observant female passengers often aren't excited to get on the back of a Gojek bike with a male driver. So this woman had a business idea for kind of female drivers and female passengers. Interesting. And we started talking about it. And she's like, oh, and by the way, I was talking about it. I was like, that sounds really good. And then she's like, yeah, I was in the Wall Street Journal last week. I was like, you're in the Wall Street Journal? And it's just amazing. Like, so she's been great. So I've joined her. I mean, sometimes I think the challenge is you can't do a ton for everybody. And I mean, probably for people in this room who get pitched ideas all the time, I think I've really tried to kind of like traffic cop some of these things to other people because you can't do everything for everyone. I do think kind of mentoring networks in markets can be really powerful. And the other thing that I've had some focus on recently is diaspora support. So, clearly in a place like DC or in the US, we've got folks tied back to their diaspora. Like, how can we help back? So I think there's tons of opportunities. I think it's I probably take even in your question that like you've probably been pitched yourself on some things. And how do you, yeah.
There's a movie that you may want to see. It's actually over 20 years old, but it's called The Player.
Okay.
And it starred Tim Robbins. And yes, I'm Todd Wiggins. There was a movie came out in the early 90s called The Player, starring Tim Robbins, and Whoopi Goldberg was in it, and Lyle Lober, and a lot of other. And it was about how Hollywood works from the position from a producer and always being bombarded with ideas.
Right.
And how some people feel slighted if their idea isn't really seriously considered.
Yeah.
So do you find that happens recently?
Yeah, I mean, it's like sometimes there's good entrepreneurs, as we all know, are like, they're hustling. And I say that in the most positive way. So, hey, LinkedIn is an amazing tool. Like, many of us are on there. I think most of us are sort of reachable. I mean, I'm always like telling my students to be basically be a pain in the ass to people. Like, I think sometimes millennials are like, they're too polite. Well, not always too polite, but let's just say this. They actually don't. I mean, this is one of my things I tell my students. I'm like, there's a great app on here on the phone called The Phone. Like, try to use it, like, because they'll just try to use other tools. So I think, for those that kind of work it, and I certainly try to encourage my student entrepreneurs to do it. I mean, there's folks that want to help. So I try to when I'm out kind of traveling around, I try to connect people back and be helpful. But yeah, Yvette.
When I went to Pensacola on the IVLP, I noticed.
Hold on one second. Let's yeah.
When I went to Pensacola on the IVLP event last year, I noticed that in Pensacola they had Impact 100, and it was a really good model for philanthropy, but it wasn't government run, it was private sector run, and they had really good management of the money, and they first started with $100,000 to give to one deserving entrepreneur. But then they got membership of people who are stakeholders in their community who wanted to see positive things in their community. So their membership fee was like $1,000 per year per person. And so they have like, I don't know, 1,000 members right now. So they would have like a lot of money to give to many different entrepreneurs. But they carefully select these people, and then they would have a voting. The members would have a voting, and each one would have one vote. And whenever they choose, and they would have in the arts, they would have in the science, they would have in all different, like 5 different fields. And I like the way they handled it, because they chose the person carefully, and then they gave the entrepreneur the money in stages, and they would have payback. The people would exit, and they would have success. Rarely would they have like not successful entrepreneurs. So I think their model for philanthropy is very good, and maybe could be copied in different places. Then we also visited Army for they help the minorities to start up their businesses and give money to them. And again, their model is similar. So they're not depending on the government anymore for philanthropy. It's more like private sector, and it's really successful. So maybe people can look into that and just look in their local areas to see different organizations to where they could get money, where they can get money. They can apply for money.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Evan Kindle. I work for Meridian International Center on the Young Leaders of the Americas initiative. I would like to hear a little bit about some of the challenges you've faced in terms of creating kind of a universally understandable and applicable module, and how that kind of has been applied across borders, since you seem to have a very diverse cohort of people in your courses.
Sure. I mean, I can comment, and I'll put Lori on the spot. She's actually probably even seen a lot more MOOCs than me. It's interesting, like you got a clip of, on the video side, there's some great MOOCs. I mean, some of the leading MOOCs are, not technical. It's somebody like in front of a webcam. I mean, I felt like it was important that the video quality and making it kind of engaging and getting other voices. And we did things like, there's B-roll of sort of like people in their workspace, and we use music. And so I felt like to some degree, and any of us who are parents, like competing, there's so many options that are out there. Like, I mean, to some degree, these courses are competing against YouTube, they're competing against Snapchat, they're competing against, whatever else people, Fortnite for my son. Whatever people are doing. So it's this, how do you keep it really engaging on the video side? So that was a priority for me, and I worked with a really good film person, as I mentioned, a friend of mine who used to work at 60 Minutes, just to like help me storytell. Like I didn't think it was obvious, like how do you take like that Skype seminar that I did was over several days, like how do you condense material in a way that is engaging and that you can use over and over again, that has more of a timeless quality. So, the video, and I think that the second piece that has been really helpful, I mean, I know obviously like the YLI program, a lot of it is, you have the curriculum piece and then people local is, and we did this both with Yvette and Lori, is like having local facilitation. So how do you, hey, for any of you who have been in like 100-person lecture class, that's like not the most exciting, or 135,000 person lecture class. So like, how do you actually create opportunities for dialogue? So some of it was happening in discussion forums, but finding good partners. And again, I know for you guys, you're bringing people here, but like, how is that discussion facilitated? How do you get other voices in the room? So that was really important. I mean, I don't know, Lori, if you have any best practices on.
Yeah, I don't know, answer your question in a slightly different way, which is to say that North American university education is still
coveted in many parts of the world. So just to have access to what is happening on a university campus or American university education, people want that. So they're lining up to get it. So there's, in many cases, there's not that much need to really change the content for a local context. But we're also seeing, I think, the emergence of national MOOC platforms where the governments are creating their own platforms and putting their own content out there so that people can access content that's in their own language, geared towards their own context. But then those who are familiar with MOOCs may also go on to the international platforms to find international type content.
No. The one thing, and actually Lori helped me in Rwanda, we had subtitles in 16 languages. And again, this may not be totally relevant to you, but having local languages made a huge difference. I mean, I think my MOOC is still the #1 on Coursera for translation. And we have we have Khmer, we have Farsi, we have Albanian. So even for a small number of people to be able to read the subtitles, I think it really helped deepen their understanding. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Yaya Fanusi with the United States of Africa 2017 Project Task Force. I am so happy for what you guys are doing, because within the content of Africa, if you want to say for the last 60 years, there are periods where certain things are emphasized. For the last 10 years, the emphasis has now been, and you all are just catching up, US and all that, about entrepreneurship, the private sector. It's the private sector in Africa that will create institution, not institution trying to create the private sector or creating jobs. It's going to be the private sector. The problem that the entrepreneurs are facing in Africa today, and I'm sure you, from your area of expertise, is the lack of the constraint of the small countries. So you cannot scale your enterprise. So emphasis is being pushed around, okay, they can manufacture here and sell to the global market. It's not going to happen. That is fool's errand. But there will be a political federation very soon in Africa in which all these entrepreneurs and the young people that we talk to, they all want to be Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates. They're not thinking about mom and pop operation. They're not interested. They want to have big, and they have no commitment and allegiance to these countries. There will be a political federation. 2020, the declaration will be made.
Great. Sir? I don't think he's asked me. We were in high school physics class together. I'm a little worried.
Yeah, my name is Mike Lowe. I'm an entrepreneur. So you talked about the importance of government stepping in and helping where there's not, where there may not be a large private sector source of funding or networking, and you've also taught your course all over the world in all kinds of countries with varying economic and political systems. And so I imagine that a system with an active government could be useful in providing the support that's not there. But I could alternatively see a government that's very involved in the economy as maybe squelching entrepreneurship or innovative thinking.
Yep.
So I'm interested if you've seen correlation in your work between the economic and the political model of the country and the ability for entrepreneurs to thrive.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I mean, Yvette and I were talking this morning about some of the challenges of, we use this example of the US and hey, it's not easy for entrepreneurs in the US, but forming companies, even sort of the bureaucracy and really, although in Cleveland we did have a little government corruption recently, in general, we don't face corruption challenges in other places. I mean, Yvette was sharing with me an experience where, and it was somebody from Greece that you were talking to, sort of sharing perspectives about what it's like to do in Belize and then how much more challenging it is in Greece.
I was very grateful. I was very, very grateful, but I thought it was hard in Belize. When I thought it was hard in Belize, it was even harder in Greece or in Nigeria and some other African countries because it took so much longer for them to start up their business. And in Belize, it took maybe a week, 2 weeks. And I thought that was long because I wanted to start it off in immediately. But, and they would tell me, oh, it takes so much months and then you need to get further documentation, et cetera, et cetera. So it was very interesting that we all face challenges. But then some of us have greater challenges. So we have to be grateful and just keep pushing and finding the way forward.
Yeah, and I think a lot, like that, one of the nice things about the MOOCs is like this direct conversation. I actually was in Greece like 2 months ago, and someone was just telling the story about Greece versus Nigeria, and some of the challenges that they were sharing in the discussion forum with a Nigerian entrepreneur. Directly, in Vietnam, and some of this, I think, is a fear, even on the government side, putting even aside like the type of government it is, like when government programs back entrepreneurs, many of them aren't gonna work. I mean, we know that 1 in 10 or 2 in 10 startups are gonna sort of succeed. So if you're the government official that starts a program and it's like, hey, we had 8 of 10 of these things fail, they're worried about getting fired, right? So I think part of the question, even outside because China and Vietnam and some socialist countries have done an amazing job on the governmental side in supporting entrepreneurship, but even there, this sort of like willingness to embrace risk on that many of these programs aren't going to work. And I think it's the same in philanthropy. I mean, because I think we're all about, hey, we got to evaluate and how do these things work? And even in Cleveland, I have an entrepreneur actually is featured in the MOOC. His company is called eFuneral, and it failed. It was like Yelp for funeral homes, and he took a lot of money. Actually, it's a really good idea. It's probably a little before his time, but he took a bunch of money from the state to build his company, and it didn't work out. And then the question I asked my students is was it worth it? Was it worth government investment? And so this entrepreneur he stayed in Cleveland and he's doing his next company. So kind of, if not for some of these programs, maybe someone like him leaves. It's interesting in the EU, I mean, because of movement between European countries, one of the biggest challenges that a lot of countries that I visited is keeping talent. So do the governmental programs provide enough support and, to keep people there because people can move? Yeah. Okay, nice to connect, yeah.
Oh, thank you. So, we go out and visit other countries and we have a lot of ideas from here that we take there. And sometimes we go there and we get surprised that there's some great ideas in these places. Have you run into ideas as you've gone to other places or have been involved with entrepreneurs in other places that you've brought back to Cleveland or think that it would add value if you were to bring it back to Cleveland or to the US for that matter?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I was in Greece in March. I mean, one of the things that I've tried to do is just connect the dots. I had a group of my case students in Greece and we did many consulting projects, and there was a Greek entrepreneur who was developing a platform for accelerators to better track progress of companies. So we brought some of this global connectivity. So a lot of, even my own view as a venture capitalist, oftentimes I'm I don't know, I'm not sure myself. Let's talk to people. So I think people like us that do tons of travel that can connect back. So it actually turned out that this technology that we saw in Greece had some interesting applications according to the accelerator that we talked to in Cleveland. So I think oftentimes entrepreneurs are solving problems in their local market that have global applications. And I think even through things like MOOCs, this connectivity and revealing ideas to one another. I think one of the challenges is oftentimes entrepreneurs are they don't want to share. They think they have some proprietary thing. They're you have to sign an NDA. And I think oftentimes venture capitalists are no, just sort of share. I think there's more of an ethos right now of even with what we call, minimum viable prototype, just go out and sort of test an idea, put something out there, let people react, early software testing. I mean, that's where a lot of this lean startup stuff comes from. It's put out a piece of software that is going to be buggy and you're going to have to adapt over time. So I have found through some of my travels, some really interesting ideas. And then I just I try to connect them with people in the healthcare space as well. It's what could be the potential market for some of these things? Nidhi.
Hi, Nidhi Vivatrad. I'm an entrepreneur in the area as well. So you started talking about the differences of Silicon Valley versus here. One of the other differences is just like industry standards for, we know what standard term sheets look like for a sit down, and they're different here. And that increases velocity when there's kind of a general acceptance on how things work. How can your stakeholders kind of encourage that? Because that's actually the practical stuff that often slows down entrepreneurship when, they found someone who's willing to finance an idea, but they're, trying to squeeze them for terms that aren't really reasonable. But maybe the entrepreneur doesn't know that or is uncomfortable with that. Like, how could...
That's a great question. And, for those, and Nidhi knows it because he has started and funded companies, some of the vernacular around term sheets. So term sheets tend to be, these are the summary documents. It's like a summary of like the key legal documents of an early stage company deal. I think what's interesting, broadly speaking, are there's an entrepreneur named Brad Feld based out in Boulder. He had a blog. And he was trying to put things out there because I think there used to be a time, and I think this is actually true in a lot of parts of the world, where you needed to hire. I don't know if there's any lawyers in the room, but like, lawyers would be like, "Oh, you can't do this without us." And I think what has happened, and Brad and Jason Mendelson, there's a book called Venture Deals that I actually use in my class that has like tried to open up a broader understanding, and things like Y Combinator and their term sheet and. So I feel like, and it may be different from your own experience, but like I feel like at least in the U.S. market, there's a broader, even in places like Cleveland, where terms do look different, and valuations are different. I mean, obviously, valuations. Well, it's funny because Cleveland entrepreneurs will always be like, if we were in San Francisco, we'd be worth $25 million, and Cleveland we're worth $1 million. It's like, well, go to San Francisco. I think in other parts of the world, it's more I mean, I think you hit on it. It's more challenging. So I think a piece of the puzzle is sharing some of these things. I do think I'm often shocked. I'll be in places like Indonesia or Thailand or wherever. Like they're reading, they've got access to AngelList and they've got access to some of these articles. Their understanding isn't always maybe as sophisticated as in the U.S. But I guess in some ways, like I think it's better than I would have thought in terms of like access to some of this, but it isn't seamless.
It'd be nice if the philanthropic organizations helped provide an incentive for like the lenders or the venture capitalists in those markets to stick to terms that have been open sourced.
Yeah, interesting. Like great. I think we have time for one more question. Sure. No, go for it. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, thank you. I'm good, thanks. I'm really curious, because you have such a broad spanning network, what you've been able to learn about the target group. So what groups actually do come on the site? Who frequents it? Who needs this, right? Like, age group, educational background, what are they doing? I'm just really curious because it sounds like geographically it's all over. And then the second question I had was, in terms of what people use the course for, it sounds like in Belize there were some, fantastic like networking opportunities that came out of this. But I'm curious how people use the course as well, since you said, it's sort of similar to, this is like competing against YouTube and whatnot. And then last question, sorry, but I was wondering if you have any data on like the, kind of your users or their usage patterns, what the utility, because I think that learning could be really beneficial to different types of organizations, including the one I work in, and professors and others who are trying to spread learning around entrepreneurship.
Sure. No, all good questions. So we did do some survey work, both during the course and actually now as part of the book, about trying to understand who took it, why did they take the course, what did they do with it. We did find some, it's interesting because we have a few people that took the course here. I mean, I don't know, Yvette, if you felt like, because I think my observation, and actually both Lori and Yvette are entrepreneurs, like my observation of both of you is that like, it wasn't that necessarily like my course in particular Because there are other courses that are, and hey, there's a whole array of courses out there on entrepreneurship. Like this, some of it may have been the network, some of it may have been, and even the mix of people that took the class, like in Rwanda or Belize, like it really spanned, like, because we weren't quite sure who would take it. I think some were entrepreneurs kind of working on their business now. Some are more kind of maybe business executives working for traditional companies who sort of want to give back. Some were investors, some were government officials, some were NGOs, some were students. I mean, how would you say you used the class, Yvette, practically? Besides, because we talked about your network, like how would you say you used it?
Well, I used it to network, well, within Belize itself, with other entrepreneurs within Belize itself, and to get to know other organizations that I might be able to use to get funding from, but also to source suppliers internationally, because that was very important for me to source some supplies, because I deal with paper. I'm a paper converting company. And
did you meet people in the class that helped you do that?
Online.
Okay.
I met some people that were able to refer me to some people in China.
Okay.
And so that's why I'm going in October of this year to go and meet with some of those people. And it is very helpful for me. And it was very relevant for me. So this specific course came at a good time in my life for me. So it was valuable and relevant for me. I don't know about anyone else, but I just know.
I mean, it's
for
so
me
funny.
it
Like if
is.
you had said, I wouldn't have listed a reason to take my class is that you might meet a Chinese supplier through someone else. But like, I think those kind of nice, like.
It just happened. I didn't take it for that. I just took it to find
That's
out
great.
more about it. But it turned out to be that way for me because I ask questions, and I'm the type of person that I want to know, and I ask a million questions, and I get to know you, and I want to know more about you, and then can you help me find this? Can you help me find that? And
Great.
and I do that sort of things, and it might be annoying sometimes, but but like you said, annoy them.
Good. All right. And I'm happy if you get, I can send you some of the research stuff that I have. Great. Well, thanks for taking a beautiful afternoon to sit inside. And Andrew, thank you and CSIS for hosting me. This was fun. All right. Thanks.